I'm Alina, 30 years old, and I built a six-figure boutique business from a single sewing machine in my garage while working double shifts at a diner. The morning sun hit my kitchen island, illuminating the granite in a way that usually made me smile. Not today. Today, the light felt blinding, harsh, exposing every dust mote in the air. I gripped my coffee mug so hard my knuckles turned white, the ceramic biting into my skin. I was vibrating with a mix of adrenaline and terror, though a minute ago it had just been excitement. I had woken up feeling like a queen. Today was the day. The contractors were scheduled to arrive at my shop, Alina's Thread, in exactly 2 hours. We were breaking down the west wall. We were expanding. I had spent 5 years eating instant noodles, skipping vacations, and mending socks instead of buying new ones just to save for this expansion. $50,000. It was sitting in my high-yield business savings account, ready to be wired to the construction firm by noon. I set the mug down on the counter. A drop of coffee spilled, dark and ominous against the white stone. I ignored it. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the banking app icon. I needed to verify the transfer limit one last time before I headed to the shop. I tapped the blue icon. The little white wheel spun, round and round. My heart did a strange flutter, just a beat skip. Anticipation, I told myself. I was about to level up my life. The screen flashed, Face ID accepted. The dashboard loaded. I blinked. I blinked again, harder this time, feeling my eyelashes brush against my cheeks. I brought the phone closer to my face, squinting as if the proximity would change the pixels on the screen. Available balance, $35. A sound escaped my throat. It wasn't a scream. It was a wet, choked gasp, like I'd just been punched in the solar plexus. No, I whispered. The word sounded foreign in the empty kitchen. No, no, no. I frantically swiped down to refresh. The little loading wheel spun again, mocking me. It had to be a glitch. Banks had glitches all the time. Maybe the server was down. Maybe I was looking at the wrong account. I tapped the screen with a trembling finger, switching from checking to savings. Savings balance, $0. The room tilted. I actually had to grab the edge of the counter to keep from falling over. My legs felt like they had turned to water. A cold sweat prickled instantly along my hairline, freezing the back of my neck. I felt bile rise in my throat, acidic and burning. $50,000, gone. Think, Alina, think, I hissed at myself, my voice shaking. Was I hacked? Did someone clone my card? I had strictly controlled access. Nobody had the passwords, nobody except. I froze. My eyes darted to the transaction history. The list populated slowly, line by line. There it was. One single, massive transaction processed at 3:14 a.m. Outgoing wire transfer, 50,000. I tapped on the transaction to see the details, my breath coming in short, shallow, ragged gasps. The room was spinning faster now. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, a whooshing sound like the ocean in a storm. Recipient, Leo Vance. Memo, for the wedding of the century, thanks Mom. The phone slipped from my hand. It hit the tile floor with a loud clatter, face down, but I didn't reach for it. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. Leo, my stepson, my husband's 22-year-old son from his first marriage. The boy I had tried to be a friend to because I was too young to be a mother to him. The boy who had been demanding, relentless, and cruel about his upcoming nuptials to a girl he'd known for 3 months. He had wanted a destination wedding in Italy. He wanted a castle. He wanted a 5-course truffle dinner. My husband, Mark, had told him no. We didn't have that kind of money to throw away on a party. We offered him a reasonable check, generous even, but he had thrown it back in our faces, calling us cheap, calling me the barrier to his happiness. I stared at the phone on the floor. The screen was cracked. A spiderweb fracture ran right through the center. How did he get in? Then the memory hit me like a physical slap. 3 years ago, a medical emergency. Leo had been in a car accident and Mark was out of the country. I had added Leo as an authorized user to that specific account temporarily to transfer bail money and hospital fees instantly. I never took him off. I had forgot. I had simply forgotten. And he had waited. He had watched. He knew I was saving for the expansion. He knew exactly how much was in there. Thanks, Mom, he had written. The sarcasm dripped from those words, burning into my brain even though I couldn't see the screen anymore. He didn't call me Mom. He called me Alina, usually with a sneer. He used Mom only when he wanted to twist the knife. I sank to the floor, my back sliding down the cabinet doors. The cold of the tile seeped through my leggings. I pulled my knees to my chest, my expansion, my dream. The new fabrics I had already ordered. The contractor who was driving to my shop right now. I had nothing. I was penniless. He didn't just steal money. He stole 5 years of my life. He stole the late nights where I sewed until my fingers bled. He stole the pride I felt when I looked in the mirror. A sob ripped through my chest, violent and ugly. I clutched my stomach, rocking back and forth. The panic was morphing into something else now. It was hot. It was heavy. It was sitting in the center of my chest like a ball of lead. I looked at the cracked phone again. It buzzed. A text message from the contractor. On our way, Alina, excited to get started. I stared at the message until the screen went black. He thought he had won. He thought he had secured his wedding of the century by robbing the evil stepmother. He thought I would cry, complain to his father, and eventually roll over because family is family. I wiped the tears from my face with the back of my hand. The motion was rough, aggressive. My skin stung. I reached out and picked up the phone. My hand was still shaking, but my grip was tight. Leo wanted a lesson in finance. He wanted a lesson in what happens when you cross the woman who built a kingdom from a garage. I took a deep breath, the air shuddering in my lungs. I wasn't just going to get my money back. I was going to ruin the very thing he stole it for. I'm Alina, 30 years old, and I built a 6-figure boutique business from a single sewing machine in my garage while working double shifts at a diner. I slammed the bridal suite door so hard the heavy oak frame shuddered against the wall. The sound cracked through the air like a whip, echoing off the high ceilings. I stood in the doorway, my chest heaving, my fingernails digging into my palms until I felt the sharp sting of skin breaking. Leo was standing in the center of the room. He was surrounded by discarded garment bags and empty champagne flutes. The air was thick, suffocatingly heavy with the smell of expensive sandalwood cologne and pure, unadulterated entitlement. He didn't jump. He didn't flinch. He was facing the floor-to-ceiling mirror, smoothing the lapels of a midnight blue tuxedo that shimmered under the chandelier lights. $3,000 of stolen silk wrapped around his shoulders. "Give it back," I screamed, my voice cracking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Right now, Leo, wire it back." I marched toward him, my legs trembling so violently I felt like I was walking on a ship deck in a storm. I shoved my phone screen toward his face, the negative balance glaring in the soft light. "You stole $50,000 from my business account," I spat, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "That is grand larceny, that is my life." Leo turned slowly. He looked at me with a lazy, bored expression like I was a fly buzzing too close to his ear. A slow smirk spread across his face, cruel and practiced. "You're so dramatic, Alina," he said, flicking a piece of lint off his shoulder. "Always screaming about money. I worked double shifts for 5 years for that money." I yelled, tears hot and angry prickling the corners of my eyes. "I built that account from nothing while you were partying in Europe on your dad's dime?" He laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. He stepped closer to me, looking down his nose. Exactly, he sneered. You've always been obsessed with work. It's sad. You care more about that little garage shop than you do about family. I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I did this for my future, I whispered, my voice trembling. Well, now you're doing it for mine, he interrupted, checking his reflection in the mirror again. It's about time you contributed to my happiness. Consider it a tax for invading our lives. I stared at him, my mouth agape. The room spun. I tried to be a mother to you, I said, the hurt suddenly piercing through the anger. He whipped around, his eyes flashing with sudden venom. You aren't my mother, you're a placeholder parent. You were just there to pay the bills and keep the house clean until I got out. The insult hit me in the gut like a physical blow. A placeholder. He turned his back on me, dismissing me as if I didn't exist. He picked up a crystal tumbler of whiskey and took a sip. Now get out, he said casually over his shoulder. The photographer will be here in 10 minutes. You look like a mess, and I don't want you ruining the aesthetic of my pre-wedding photos. I stood there for one heartbeat, too. The silence in the room was deafening. My hands uncurled at my sides. The heat in my chest turned ice cold. He thought I was just a checkbook. He thought I was powerless. I turned on my heel and walked out, the sound of his laughter following me into the hall. I didn't slam the door this time. I closed it softly, with a terrifying sense of calm settling over me. If he wanted a contribution to his wedding, I would give him one. But it wouldn't be money. I'm Alina, 30 years old, and I went from being a respected business owner to sleeping in a rusted sedan because my stepson stole my life savings for a party. The bell above the shop door jingled, a sound that used to make my heart leap with the promise of a new customer. Now, it sounded like a death knell. I looked up from the pile of unpaid invoices scattered across my cutting table. Standing there wasn't a bride looking for a custom gown. It was Mr. Henderson, my landlord, and he wasn't smiling. The check bounced, Alina, he said, his voice flat, devoid of the grandfatherly warmth he used to show me. He held up the piece of paper. It fluttered in the draft from the air conditioner I could no longer afford to run. Mr. Henderson, please, I begged, rushing around the counter. My knees hit the wood, bruising instantly, but I didn't feel the pain. It's a bank error. I was hacked. I just need a week. My husband returns on Monday. I can't run a charity, he interrupted, placing a folded red paper on the glass counter. You're 3 months behind and this was your last strike. You have to vacate tonight. The world went silent. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine. Tonight, I whispered. But my inventory, my machines. The locks change at 8:00 a.m. tomorrow, he said, turning his back on me. Whatever is left inside becomes property of the building. He walked out. The bell jingled again, cheerful, mocking. I stood there for a full minute staring at the red eviction notice until the letters blurred into a bloody smear. I didn't cry. I think I had run out of tears hours ago. I went into survival mode. I backed my car up to the front door. It was a 10-year-old sedan with a cracked bumper and vinyl seats that had baked in the sun all day. I started hauling. The heat was oppressive, 90 degrees of humid city air that clung to my skin like plastic wrap. I dragged bolts of heavy imported silk out to the curb, sweating through my shirt. My muscles screamed as I lifted the industrial sewing machine, the one I had bought with my very first tax refund, and shoved it into the passenger seat. It sat there like a passenger, buckled in, the metal cold against my arm. Passers-by stopped to watch. I saw a woman I recognized, a regular customer, pause on the sidewalk. She looked at my frantic movements, the pile of frantic debris, and then looked away, embarrassed for me. I felt shame burn my cheeks hotter than the sun. I couldn't fit everything. I had to choose. I left the mannequins. I left the vintage velvet armchair where I used to sit and sketch. I left the cutting table I had sanded and stained with my own hands. By sunset, my car was packed so full I could barely see out the rear window. I locked the shop door for the last time. I didn't look back. If I looked back, I knew I would collapse on the pavement and never get up. I drove aimlessly for an hour. I couldn't go home. The house belonged to Mark, but Leo was there. Leo, who had smirked at me. Leo, who had taken my security and turned it into hors d'oeuvres. If I went there, I would end up in prison for what I would do to him. Mark wasn't answering his phone in Tokyo. I was completely, utterly alone. I pulled into the back of a 24-hour supermarket parking lot. I parked between a dumpster and a cart return, hoping the shadows would hide me. The engine sputtered and died. The silence that filled the car was heavy, suffocating. Then the rain started. It began as a drizzle and quickly turned into a deluge, drumming against the metal roof. Plink, plink, thud. It sounded like stones being thrown at me. The temperature dropped. The vinyl seats that had burned me earlier were now freezing, leaching the warmth from my body. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering violently. My stomach cramped, a hollow, twisting pain. I hadn't eaten in 24 hours. I reached under the driver's seat and pulled out the tire iron. It was heavy, rusted, and cold. I gripped it with both hands, my knuckles turning white. This was my security system now. This was my lock and key. I stared out the window at the shoppers running to their cars, loading bags of groceries, going home to warm kitchens and soft beds. I was a ghost to them, invisible, ruined. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, 4% battery remaining. I shouldn't have looked. I knew I shouldn't have looked. It was digital self-harm. But my thumb moved on its own. I opened Instagram. Leo's profile was a circle of bright colors at the top of the feed. I tapped it. The screen illuminated the dark car interior with a sickeningly cheerful glow. Video 1, a close-up of a cake. It was 5 tiers tall, draped in edible gold leaf that shimmered under professional lighting. The tasting was a success, Leo's voice narrated, smug and light. Gold leaf imported from Dubai, only the best for us. That gold leaf was my rent. That frosting was my inventory. Video 2, a horse-drawn carriage. 2 white stallions with braided manets standing in front of a luxury hotel. Just booked the transport, the caption read. Fairytale vibes only. I watched the horse stomp its hoof. A single hour of renting that carriage cost more than I made in a month of alterations. He was spending my blood, sweat, and tears in real time. He was broadcasting his theft as a lifestyle, flaunting the spoils of war while I sat in a parking lot clutching a tire iron to keep from screaming. I felt something snap inside me. It wasn't a loud crack. It was a quiet, definitive shift. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve that settled in the pit of my stomach, heavier than the hunger. He thought he had broken me. He thought sending me to rock bottom would make me disappear. But he forgot one thing about rock bottom. It's a solid foundation. It is the only place left where you have nothing to lose. I took a screenshot of the gold cake. I took a screenshot of the carriage. I let the phone die. The screen went black, plunging me back into darkness. I tightened my grip on the tire iron until my hands hurt. I closed my eyes and listened to the rain. I didn't sleep. I planned. Leo wanted a show. I would give him a finale he would never forget. I'm Alina, 30 years old, and I'm currently sitting in a sweltering car watching my stolen life savings being unloaded from a delivery truck in the form of 10,000 white roses. I parked the sedan 2 blocks away. wedged behind a landscaping van so no one would spot my rusted bumper. The engine ticked as it cooled, a sharp metallic sound in the humid air. Across the street, the iron gates of the Vanderbilt estate stood open. That estate costs more to rent for a single night than I made in my entire first year of business. I rolled my window down an inch, just enough to let air in but keep the world out. The scent hit me instantly. It wasn't the smell of exhaust or city grit. It was the overwhelming, cloying scent of fresh-cut flowers. I watched a team of florists in matching black uniforms swarm a refrigerated truck. They were carrying armfuls of white hydrangeas and avalanche roses, the petals so perfect they looked fake. My stomach let out a long, audible growl. It was a twisting, hollow pain that radiated up my esophagus. I pressed my fist against my belly, trying to silence the biological alarm. I had half a bottle of warm water and a packet of stale crackers in the glove box, but I couldn't bring myself to eat them. Not while watching this. It was a grotesque contrast. Over there, behind those gilded gates, my stepson was building a fairy tale. He was constructing a monument to his own vanity using the money I had scraped together, dollar by dollar, over a decade of sleepless nights and bled fingers. Here, inside the car, the air was thick with the smell of old vinyl and my own desperation. I watched a florist drop a single rose. It hit the pavement, its white head snapping off. She didn't even stop to pick it up, she just stepped over it. That single flower probably cost $15. That was breakfast, lunch, and dinner for me right now. I realized then that Leo hadn't just stolen my money. Money is a number on a screen. Money is replaceable. He had stolen my security. He had stolen the ability to breathe without a weight on my chest. He had stolen my dignity and turned it into centerpieces that would be dead by tomorrow morning. The rage that had been a hot fire in my chest suddenly cooled into something solid, something sharp. I reached into the backseat and grabbed my laptop bag. It was the only piece of my professional life I had managed to save. I balanced the computer on my knees, the metal case digging into my thighs. I pulled out my phone and enabled the hotspot, 1 bar of signal. "Come on," I whispered, watching the loading circle spin. It was agonizingly slow. Every second felt like an hour. Finally, the browser loaded. Leo was arrogant. He was the kind of man who thought he was the smartest person in the room just because he was the loudest. He had access to the business accounts because Mark, my husband, and his father had insisted on teaching him the ropes. Mark wanted Leo to feel involved. I had argued against it, but I had lost. Leo thought he had scrubbed everything. He thought that by deleting the transaction history from the main dashboard, the evidence was gone. He didn't know about the back-end archives. He didn't know that I, the placeholder parent, the glorified maid, had built this system from the ground up. I knew where the digital skeletons were buried because I was the one who built the graveyard. I logged into the admin portal. My fingers flew across the keys, fueled by a manic energy that overrode my hunger. Access granted. I navigated past the surface-level ledgers, the ones he had sanitized to show Mark everything was fine. I went deeper. I accessed the raw data logs, the immutable records of every keystroke and transfer command initiated in the last 6 months. My screen illuminated the dark car with a blue, ghostly light. There it was. It wasn't one lump sum, it was a hemorrhage. Transfer to Elite Event Planning, $15,000. Transfer to Prestige Catering, $22,000. Cash withdrawal, $5,000. The dates lined up perfectly with my husband's business trips. Every time Mark was out of the country, Leo dipped his hand into the jar. I scrolled down, my eyes widening. He hadn't just drained the savings, he had leveraged the credit line. He had taken out loans in the business's name, forging my digital signature. I felt bile rise in my throat. He had mortgaged a future he didn't own. Then I saw the most recent entry timestamps from just 3 days ago. Transfer to Offshore Holdings LLC, $50,000. I froze. That wasn't a wedding expense. That was a getaway car. He wasn't just spending the money on a party. He was siphoning what was left into a personal account I couldn't touch. He was cleaning us out completely before Mark got home on Monday. I looked up from the screen, staring through the windshield at the estate. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the manicured lawn. The florists were finishing up, the white roses now glowing pink in the twilight. He wasn't just a spoiled brat. He was a criminal. A dark, terrifying smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. I didn't feel hungry anymore. I felt like a hunter who had just found the blood trail. He wanted a lesson. He wanted me to contribute to his big day. I hit download on the full transaction history. I was going to give him a wedding gift that would burn his entire world to the ground. I'm Alina, 30 years old, and I am currently staring at a PDF document that proves my stepson isn't just a thief. He is trying to send me to federal prison. I was sitting on the cracked tile floor of a 24-hour laundromat 3 towns over from my house. It was 3:00 a.m. The air inside was hot and humid, thick with the chemical smell of cheap detergent and the metallic tang of dryer lint. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a headache-inducing flicker, casting long, sickly shadows across the rows of spinning machines. I had chosen this place because it was the only spot open that wouldn't kick me out for buying nothing. I had found an outlet behind a vending machine. My laptop charger was plugged in, the cord pulled taut like a tripwire. My stomach was a knotted mess of hunger and nausea. I hadn't eaten a real meal in 36 hours, but the hunger pangs had been replaced by a hollow, vibrating anxiety that made my hands shake as they hovered over the keyboard. I needed to know the extent of the damage. I had seen the empty checking account. I had seen the zero balance on the credit cards, but something about the way Leo had flaunted that gold leaf cake on Instagram gnawed at me. The math didn't add up. The wedding vendors he was tagging, the venue, the custom suits, it cost more than the liquid cash I had available to steal. Where was the rest of the money coming from? I logged into the backend of my boutique's accounting software. The screen glowed with a stark, blinding white light in the dim laundromat. Welcome, Alina. The dashboard loaded. At first glance, it looked like a wasteland. Zeros where there used to be safety nets. Red lines where there used to be profit margins. I clicked into the Tax Documents tab. I needed to see if he had touched the quarterly estimates. Nothing seemed amiss there, but then I saw it. A folder labeled Q3 MISC Assets. My heart hammered against my ribs. I hadn't created that folder. I was meticulous with my filing. Everything was labeled by date and category. MISC was a sloppy catch-all that I never used. I moved the cursor over the folder icon. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I felt a bead of cold sweat trickle down my spine, soaking into my shirt. I was terrified of what was inside, but I knew I had to look. I double-clicked. A single file sat inside. Bridge Capital Agreement Final PDF. The blood drained from my face. Bridge loans are the payday loans of the business world. High interest, short terms, predatory terms. You only take one out if you are desperate or if you expect a massive payout immediately. I opened the file. The document loaded pixel by pixel, dragging out the torture. Loan principal, $85,000. Interest rate, 28%. Term, 60 days. I gasped, a sharp, ragged sound that made a man folding denim overalls 2 rows away look up at me. I clamped a hand over my mouth. $85,000. He hadn't just drained the accounts. He had leveraged the future. I scrolled frantically, my eyes scanning the fine print, looking for the catch. And there it was, in bold text at the bottom of page 3. Collateral, all inventory, machinery, leasehold improvements, and intellectual property associated with Alina's alterations. He had put up my shop, my sewing machines, my fabric stock, the vintage mannequins I had restored by hand. Everything I had built, everything that defined who I was now the property of a predatory lender. But that wasn't the worst part. I scrolled to the signature page. There at the bottom was a digital stamp. Signed, Alina Vance. Authenticated via secure admin token 8842. The room started to spin. The rhythmic thump 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 of the washing machines synced with the pounding in my ears. That token was physical. It was a USB key I kept in the fireproof safe in my home office. The safe that Leo claimed he didn't know the combination to. He must have watched me. He must have memorized the code, waited until I was out running errands, and physically stolen my identity to authorize this loan. The weight of his betrayal hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I leaned back against the vending machine, the cold metal digging into my shoulder blades. This wasn't just about money anymore. If I defaulted on this loan, which I would because he had already spent the principal, the lender wouldn't just take my shop. They would come for me. They would see the digital signature. They would see the security token authentication. To the bank and to the law, it would look like I took out a high-risk loan, cashed it out, and then claimed fraud to avoid paying it back. That's wire fraud, that's a felony. Leo wasn't just willing to leave me homeless. He was willing to let me rot in a prison cell so he could have a horse-drawn carriage. I closed my eyes. I felt tears pricking at the corners, hot and stinging. The sheer cruelty of it was suffocating. He had called me Mom for 10 years. I had taught him how to tie his tie. I had nursed him through the flu, and this was his thank you, a one-way ticket to federal prison. I sat there for a long time, listening to the water rushing through the pipes in the wall. I felt small. I felt stupid. I felt broken. But then the feeling shifted. It was like a fever breaking. The heat of the panic evaporated, leaving behind a cold, crystalline clarity. My breathing steadied. My hands stopped shaking. I opened my eyes and looked at the screen again. I wasn't looking at a death sentence. I was looking at evidence. I navigated to the document's metadata. I clicked Properties. Created Oct 14 11:42 p.m. Source IP address 192.16841 Guest Network The Ritz-Carlton. A dark, terrifying smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. I was at home on October 14th. My phone's GPS data would prove that. But the IP address on the loan application came from the hotel where Leo was staying for his pre-wedding relaxation week. He was arrogant. He thought he was smarter than me because he was younger, because he knew how to use Instagram filters. But he didn't understand how digital footprints worked. He had left a breadcrumb trail right to his door. I didn't feel hungry anymore. I felt powerful. I plugged in my external hard drive. I downloaded the PDF. I downloaded the metadata logs. I downloaded the entire transaction history. Leo wanted a wedding to remember. I was going to give him one. I wasn't going to call him. I wasn't going to warn him. I was going to let him walk down that aisle. I was going to let him say, I do. And then I was going to introduce him to the consequences of his actions. I closed my laptop with a snap. The sound echoed through the empty laundromat like a gunshot. I'm Alina, 30 years old, and I am currently sitting in a high-end coffee shop with $4.12 in my pocket, preparing to destroy a marriage before it even begins. I arrived at the Gilded Bean 20 minutes early. It was the kind of place where the barista wore a bow tie and the air smelled like roasted hazelnut and old money. I sat in the furthest corner booth, my back pressed against the dark mahogany wainscoting. I felt exposed. I kept my hands tucked firmly beneath the table. I was wearing the same clothes I had been wearing when I was thrown out of my house 2 days ago. My cardigan was a soft gray wool, but the right cuff was fraying, a loose thread dangling like a dead nerve. There was a small stain on my jeans from where I had sat on the laundromat floor. I looked like a vagrant trying to blend in with the country club crowd. My stomach gave a loud, treacherous growl. The smell of fresh croissants was torture. I hadn't eaten anything substantial since a granola bar I found in the bottom of my purse yesterday. I took a sip of the tap water I had requested, the ice clinking softly against the glass. The cold liquid hit my empty stomach like a stone. I checked my phone. 10:00 a.m. exactly. The heavy oak door swung open. Robert and Cynthia Sterling walked in. They were the bride's parents, and they looked exactly like the kind of people who spent their weekends on sailboats. Robert wore a crisp navy blazer that probably cost more than my car. Cynthia was draped in a cream-colored cashmere shawl, her silver hair coiffed into a perfect, immobile helmet. They scanned the room, their eyes sliding over me at first. They were looking for someone else. Someone impressive, someone powerful. Then their eyes landed on me. Their expressions shifted into bright, practiced smiles. "Elena," Cynthia beamed, gliding toward my table. "Oh, it is so wonderful to finally meet you in person." She reached out to hug me. I stood up awkwardly, conscious of my rumpled clothes. She smelled like expensive perfume and hairspray. Her embrace was stiff but enthusiastic. "We were so disappointed you couldn't make the rehearsal dinner," Robert said, shaking my hand with a firm, bone-crushing grip. "But Leo explained how busy you are with the international markets." I froze. My hand went limp in his. "The international markets?" I repeated, my voice sounding thin and scratchy. "Oh, don't be modest," Cynthia laughed, sliding into the booth opposite me. She placed a quilted designer handbag on the table, a bag that cost 3 months of my rent. "Leo told us everything, the portfolio liquidation, the silent angel investing. He says you're the wizard behind the curtain." I sat back down slowly, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I looked at them. They weren't looking at a struggling seamstress who had just slept in her car. They were looking at an eccentric, youthful millionaire. The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. Leo hadn't just stolen my money, he had rewritten my entire identity to justify the cash flow. He had turned me into a silent piggy bank, a benevolent eccentric who wanted to burn cash on ice sculptures and imported orchids. "He told you I was an investor?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "He said you wanted to pay for the wedding as a surprise," Robert said, leaning in with a conspiratorial wink. "That you insisted on handling the finances personally so we wouldn't have to worry about a thing. It's incredibly generous, Elena, really. We tried to contribute, but Leo said you would be insulted." I felt the blood drain from my face. My hand started to tremble violently under the table. He had played both sides. He told me the bride's family was demanding and expensive. He told them I was a rich donor insisting on paying. He kept us apart, kept us from talking so he could siphon everything into his own pockets while we thanked him for the coordination. I felt a sudden, sharp clarity. The nausea vanished, replaced by a cold, hard rage. "I need you to look at something," I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick manila envelope. I placed it on the polished wood table. It looked ugly and utilitarian against the fine grain. "What's this?" Cynthia asked, her smile faltering slightly. Is this about the seating chart? Open it, I said. Robert frowned, exchanging a glance with his wife. He reached out and flipped the folder open. The first page was the bank statement showing the unauthorized transfers. The second page was the bridge loan document with the forged digital signature. The third was the metadata log proving the loan was executed from Leo's hotel IP address. Silence descended on the table. It was heavy and suffocating. I watched their eyes scan the lines. I saw the exact moment the understanding hit them. Robert's face went from confused to pale gray. Cynthia's hand flew to her mouth, her diamond rings clicking against her teeth. I don't understand, Robert stammered, looking up at me. His eyes were wide, stripped of their earlier confidence. This says the account is overdrawn by $80,000. I am not an international investor, I said, my voice steady and low. I own a small alteration shop on 4th Street. I sew wedding dresses. I don't buy them. Cynthia made a small, choked sound. Leo stole everything, I continued, leaning forward. I pulled my hands out from under the table and placed them on the wood. I didn't care about the frayed cuffs anymore. He forged my signature. He mortgaged my business. He told you I was rich so you wouldn't ask where the money was coming from. He told me you were demanding so I wouldn't ask where the money was going. I pointed a shaking finger at the document. That money isn't for the wedding, I said. Look at the last transfer, yesterday, $50,000 to an offshore LLC. Robert stared at the paper. His hands were shaking now, too. The paper rattled in his grip. He's not paying the vendors, Robert whispered, horror dawning on him. The caterer called me yesterday asking about the final deposit. Leo told me it was a wire transfer delay. There is no wire transfer, I said. There is no money. He's cashing out. He's going to let the checks bounce on Monday while he's on his honeymoon. Cynthia began to cry, silent tears tracking through her foundation. But my daughter, Sarah, does she know? I don't know, I admitted. But if she marries him tomorrow, half of that debt becomes her problem. He is dragging her into a felony fraud investigation. The air in the cafe felt thin. The espresso machine hissed loudly in the background, a jarring sound against the collapse of their world. Robert closed the folder. He looked older than he had 5 minutes ago. The arrogance was gone. He looked like a father who had just realized he had let a wolf into the sheep pen. What do you want to do? He asked. His voice was grim. I looked at him. I looked at the fear in his eyes. I don't want to stop the wedding, I said. They both stared at me, shocked. I want him to think he got away with it, I said, feeling a dark, cold smile touch my lips. I want him to stand at that altar. I want him to think he won. And then, when he has nowhere to run, I want to take everything back. I slid a second document across the table. It was a single sheet of paper I had typed up in the library an hour ago. I have a plan, I said, but I need your help to pull it off. Robert looked at the paper. Then he looked at me. A hard, vengeful glint appeared in his eyes. He nodded once. Tell us what to do. I'm Alina, 30 years old, and today I am dressing for a funeral, even though everyone else thinks they are attending a wedding. Robert had pressed 3 crisp $100 bills into my hand before I left the coffee shop. Operational expenses, he had called it, his eyes hard and angry. He didn't offer me a ride. He didn't offer me a place to shower. He knew instinctively that I needed to do this part alone. I needed to sharpen my own blade. I drove my beat-up sedan to the outskirts of town, away from the manicured lawns and the country clubs. I pulled into the gravel lot of a Second Chances consignment shop. The sign was flickering, the sea buzzing like an entrapped insect. Inside, the air smelled of mothballs and other people's memories. I bypassed the racks of sensible blouses and worn denim. I went straight to the formal wear in the back. I needed armor. I found it sandwiched between a tacky prom dress and a stained bridesmaid gown. It was black silk, floor length, with a high neck and a back that plunged dangerously low. It was severe. It was elegant. It looked like something a villain would wear to the reading of a will. It cost $85. I paid in cash, my hand trembling slightly as I handed over the bills Robert had given me. It felt reckless to spend this kind of money on a dress when I didn't know where I was sleeping tonight, but I knew the psychology of a con artist like Leo. If I showed up looking like a victim, ragged, poor, desperate, he would laugh, he would spin it. He would tell everyone I was crazy, jealous, off my meds. But if I showed up looking like a queen, if I showed up looking like I owned the building, that would terrify him. I took the dress and a pair of second-hand velvet heels that were half a size too small. I drove to a gas station 2 miles from the wedding venue. It was a truck stop, the kind with showers for long-haul drivers. I paid $10 for a shower token and locked myself in the stall. The water was lukewarm, but it felt holy. I scrubbed the smell of the laundromat off my skin. I washed the grease of sleeping in my car out of my hair. I watched the gray, soapy water swirl down the drain, taking the old, passive Alina with it. I dried my hair under the hand dryer, the hot air blasting against my scalp until I felt dizzy. Then, the makeup. I didn't have much left in my purse, just the dregs of a life I could no longer afford. I scraped the bottom of my foundation bottle. I applied a sharp, winged eyeliner that could cut glass. I found a tube of dark red lipstick, a shade I rarely wore because it felt too aggressive. Today, aggressive was the baseline. I put on the dress. The silk was cold against my skin, heavy and fluid. It fit me like a glove. I stepped into the tight heels. I stood in front of the scarred, graffiti-covered mirror. The woman staring back at me didn't look penniless. She didn't look like she had just lost her business and her home. She looked dangerous. She looked like a woman who had nothing left to lose, which made her the most powerful person in the world. I walked back out to my car, the gravel crunching under my heels. I sat in the driver's seat and locked the doors. It was time for the logistics. I pulled out my phone. 1:15 p.m. The ceremony started at 2:00 p.m. I dialed the number for the sheriff's department first. I had spent the morning before the coffee shop meeting filing the police report, presenting the forged documents, laying out the timeline of the theft. "This is Alina," I said when the deputy answered. My voice was steady, unrecognizable to my own ears. "I'm heading to the venue now." "We have a unit en route," the deputy confirmed. "They're staging in the rear parking lot. We're waiting for the signal from the bank's fraud division to confirm the wire fraud charges are active." "They're active," I said. "I'm calling the investigator next." I hung up and dialed the second number. Agent Miller from the bank picked up on the first ring. "The warrant is signed, Alina," Miller said. His voice was grim. "We traced the offshore transfer. He moved the last 50 grand this morning. It's a felony, clear as day. We have him." "Don't move in yet," I commanded, staring at my own eyes in the rearview mirror. "Not until the ceremony starts. I want him to be standing at the altar. I want him to see me before you take him." "We'll move on your signal," Miller said. I ended the call. The silence of the car rushed back in, suffocating me. My hands started to shake again. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind the cold, hard reality of what I was about to do. I was about to ruin a wedding. I was about to humiliate someone I had once loved and trusted with my life. I was about to send him to prison. A wave of nausea rolled through me. Was I really this person? Was I really this vindictive? Maybe I should just let the police handle it. Maybe I should just drive away, start over somewhere new, leave this toxicity behind. I closed my eyes and gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I forced myself to remember Tuesday night. I remembered parking my car in the Walmart lot because it was the only place where the security guards wouldn't kick me out for sleeping. I remembered the temperature dropping to 30 degrees. I remembered wrapping myself in my coat, shivering so hard my teeth chattered, trying to sleep while hunger clawed at my stomach. I remembered scrolling through my phone in the dark, the screen's blue light stinging my tired eyes. I remembered seeing Leo's post. He was at a steakhouse. He was holding up a glass of Dom Perignon. The caption read, "To the good life, finally getting what I'm worth." He was drinking champagne bought with the money meant for my mortgage. He was eating steak bought with the payroll for my employees. He was toasting to his new life while I froze in a sedan. My eyes snapped open. The nausea was gone. The shaking stopped. I wasn't the villain of this story. I was the karma. I put the car in drive. The engine growled, a low, angry sound. "Here comes the bride," I whispered to the empty car. I peeled out of the gas station, the tires screeching against the pavement, and headed toward the church. I'm Alina, 30 years old, and I am about to crash the most expensive party in town with a police escort. I parked my sedan around the back of the cathedral, wedging it between a dumpster and a delivery van. I checked my reflection in the visor mirror one last time. The red lipstick looked like a fresh wound against my pale skin. The black silk dress pooled around my legs, cool and suffocating. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the tremor in my hands, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I opened the car door and stepped out. The air was crisp, carrying the faint sound of an organ playing inside. It was a hymn. "Joyful, joyful, we adore thee." The irony tasted like copper in my mouth. I walked toward the side entrance where I had told the deputies to wait. My velvet heels made no sound on the pavement. I felt like a phantom. I felt like the Grim Reaper arriving to collect a debt that was long overdue. Two uniformed officers were waiting by the heavy oak side doors. One was tall, with a buzz cut and a jaw of granite. The other was older, with kind eyes that hardened when they saw me. They knew the story. They had seen the paperwork. They knew that the man inside was paying for this lavish ceremony with the life savings of the woman standing before them. "Ms. Alina," the older officer asked, his voice low. "Yes," I said, my voice didn't shake. "Are you ready?" "We follow your lead," he said. "Agent Miller is covering the front exit. He's got nowhere to go." I nodded. I didn't want him to run. I wanted him to freeze. I walked past them, rounding the corner to the main entrance of the church. The massive double doors were closed. Inside, hundreds of people were witnessing a lie. I placed my palms against the wood. It felt rough and solid under my skin. I pushed. The doors were heavier than I expected, but I shoved them open with a strength born of pure distilled rage. They swung inward with a heavy, groaning creak that echoed through the cavernous space. The church was bathed in golden light, filtering through stained glass windows that depicted saints and martyrs. The pews were packed. The air was thick, suffocatingly sweet with the scent of thousands of white roses. That smell hit me first. It was a physical blow. Those roses cost $4 a stem. I knew because I had seen the invoice Leo had hidden in his glove box. I inhaled the scent, and it made my head swim with nausea. It smelled like my bank account. It smelled like my stolen future. I stepped onto the white runner carpet. The organist was the first to notice. He was perched in the loft above, and as I stepped into the light, his fingers slipped. A discordant, jarring chord shrieked through the church, interrupting the serene melody. Then silence. Every head in the back pew turned. Then the middle pews, then the front. I didn't stop. I began to walk. My heels clicked rhythmically on the floor, a slow, deliberate march, click, click, click. The whisper started like a breeze rustling through dead leaves. It swept up the aisle ahead of me. I saw confusion on their faces. They saw a woman in a severe backless black gown, dressed for a funeral, walking into a wedding with the stride of an executioner. Behind me, the heavy tread of the police officer's boots provided a bass line to my clicking heels. The sound of authority, the sound of consequences. I locked my eyes on the altar. Leo was standing there. He looked dashing in a bespoke tuxedo that I knew cost $3,000. He was holding Sarah's hands. He looked the picture of the perfect, devoted groom. Then he looked up. Our eyes met across the expanse of the church. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a physical effect. He went from a healthy tan to a sickly, translucent gray in the span of a single heartbeat. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He dropped Sarah's hands as if they burned him. I saw his eyes dart to the left, looking for an exit. Then he saw the officers flanking me. He saw the glint of the badges. He saw the handcuffs on the older officer's belt. Terror, raw and unfiltered, flooded his expression. I kept walking. I was halfway down the aisle now. The guests were openly gasping. Someone in the third row stood up, then sat back down, pulled by their spouse. I saw Robert and Cynthia in the front row. Robert turned his head. He didn't look shocked. He looked grim. He looked satisfied. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. Sarah, the bride, turned around. She looked confused, her veil clouding her expression. She looked from Leo's terrified face to me, the woman in black marching toward her. She didn't know who I was. She was just another victim in the blast radius. I reached the front of the church. The scent of the roses was overpowering here, cloying and thick. It mixed with the smell of expensive cologne, Leo's cologne. The same cologne he had worn when he told me he loved me right before he emptied my business accounts. I stopped 3 feet from him. The silence in the church was absolute. You could hear the dust motes dancing in the light. Leo was shaking. I could see the fine tremor in his hands. He looked at me pleadingly, his eyes begging me not to do this, not here, not now. He tried to mouth my name, but his lips were dry and cracked. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't cause a scene. I just smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Hello, Leo," I said. My voice was calm, carrying clearly in the acoustic perfection of the cathedral. "I believe you paid for these flowers with my money." I reached out and plucked a single white rose from the massive arrangement on the altar. I twirled it in my fingers, watching a petal fall to the floor. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" I asked, stepping closer, invading his space until I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. "Did you think I would just fade away?" "Elena," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, not here." "Oh yes," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "Here, right now, in front of God and everyone." I turned to the officers behind me. I pointed a manicured finger at the groom. "That's him," I said. "That's the man who stole $150,000 from me." The older officer stepped forward, the jingle of his handcuffs echoing like church bells. "Leo Sterling," the officer boomed, his voice filling the terrified silence. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny." Leo stumbled back, tripping over the train of Sarah's wedding dress. He looked small. Looked pathetic. The facade of the wealthy businessman crumbled, leaving nothing but a scared little thief in a stolen suit. I watched him fall, and for the first time in 3 days I didn't feel cold anymore. The priest stepped forward, his face flushed with indignation. "Young woman," he stammered, clutching his wireless microphone like a holy shield. "This is a house of God. You cannot simply—" I didn't let him finish. I reached out and wrapped my fingers around the microphone. My grip was iron. I pulled it gently but firmly from his loosening grasp. He let go, too stunned to fight me. The feedback whined, a high-pitched screech that made the guests wince. I waited for it to settle. I waited until the only sound in the cavernous room was the ragged breathing of the man standing 3 feet away from me. I turned to face the congregation. Hundreds of eyes stared back at me. I saw judgment. I saw confusion. But mostly I saw a captive audience. "I'm sorry to interrupt the ceremony," I said. My voice boomed through the speakers, magnified and distorted, bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. "But there is something the groom forgot to mention in his vows." I looked at Leo. He was trembling so violently that the boutonniere on his lapel, a white orchid that I had paid for, was shaking. "Leo told you all that he came into a windfall," I said, my eyes locking onto his. "He told you he was paying for this wedding with a generous gift, a bonus from his hard work." I reached into my clutch. My fingers brushed against the cool metal of my phone before finding the folded document. I pulled it out. I held the paper up. The light from the stained glass windows hit the official seal. "This is not a bonus," I said. "This is a federal seizure warrant." A gasp rippled through the pews. It sounded like all the oxygen being sucked out of the room at once. "The money paying for this venue?" I asked, taking a step toward Leo. "Stolen." I pointed at the brand new luxury SUV parked right outside the front doors, visible through the open archway. "That car," I said, "bought with identity theft." I looked at Sarah. She was staring at me, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide with horror. She looked down at the diamond ring sparkling on her finger. "In that ring," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly quiet. "He bought that with the payroll account for my company. He bought that with the money meant to feed 5 families." Sarah let out a choked sob. She yanked her hand back as if the diamond had suddenly turned into a live coal. I turned my gaze back to Leo. He looked like a cornered animal. Sweat was streaming down his temples, ruining his expensive spray tan. "And the suit," I said, pointing the microphone at his chest. "The very suit you are wearing, Leo. It's listed on page 3 of this warrant." I tossed the papers at his feet. They scattered on the white runner, messy and damning. "It's all mine," I whispered, though the microphone caught it. "Everything you have is mine." Leo lunged. For a split second, I thought he was going to hit me. His eyes were wild, desperate. He took a step forward, his hands clawing out. "You crazy bitch," he screamed. But he never reached me. Robert, the bride's father, moved with a speed I didn't think a man of his age possessed. He stepped onto the altar, placing his heavy frame between me and Leo. "That is enough," Robert bellowed. His voice didn't need a microphone. It was the voice of a father protecting his child. Robert turned to the priest. "The wedding is off," he announced. He looked at the guests, his face a mask of humiliated fury. "Go home, everyone, go home." Then he turned to Leo. He didn't hit him, he just looked at him with a disgust so profound it felt like a physical blow. "Don't you ever," Robert spat, "come near my daughter again." Sarah was crying now, silent, heaving sobs, her mother wrapping her arms around the white lace. The spell broke. The older officer stepped forward. "Leo Sterling," he said, grabbing Leo's arm. "Hands behind your back." "No, wait," Leo shouted, trying to twist away. "It's a misunderstanding. She's lying. She's just a jealous ex." The officer didn't listen. He spun Leo around. He forced Leo's arms behind his back, straining the fabric of the stolen tuxedo. Click. The sound of the handcuffs ratchet locking was louder than the organ music. It was crisp, it was final, it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Leo's knees buckled. The officer had to hold him up by his armpits. He looked at me over his shoulder. The arrogance was gone. The charm was gone. There was only naked terror. "Elena," he whimpered. "Elena, please don't let them take me." I lowered the microphone. I looked him dead in the eye. You did this, I said. I'm just the receipt. The officers began to drag him down the aisle. He stumbled, his expensive shoes scuffing against the white carpet. He was sobbing now, loud, ugly sounds that echoed in the silence of the church. I watched him go. I watched the man who had left me sleeping in a freezing car get hauled away to a concrete cell. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I flinched, turning around. It was Robert. He looked tired. He looked old, but his eyes were clear. Thank you, he said quietly. I nodded. I couldn't speak. The adrenaline was starting to crash, leaving my legs feeling like jelly. I looked at the altar. The white rose I had dropped was crushed underfoot. The papers were scattered. The wedding was ruined. I took a deep breath. The air still smelled like roses, but underneath it I could finally smell the rain coming. I could smell the clean, cold scent of a storm washing everything away. I turned my back on the altar and walked down the aisle, following the police out the door. I didn't look back. I'm Alina, 30 years old, and I am the owner of the city's most talked about fashion house, rebuilt dollar by dollar after being left with nothing. The industrial steam iron hisses loudly, sending a warm, white cloud up toward the exposed brick ceiling of my new studio. I press the heavy plate down onto the emerald silk, smoothing out a stubborn crease. The heat radiates against my face, flushing my cheeks, but this time it isn't from anger or humiliation. It's the heat of work. It's the heat of creation. I take a step back and look at the gown on the dress form. It's flawless, 6 months. It feels like a lifetime ago that I was standing in that freezing cathedral, destroying a wedding to save my own life. It feels like a different woman was sleeping in the backseat of a sedan, shivering under a coat that wasn't warm enough, counting pennies for a bagel. I walk over to the large bay window overlooking the avenue. The sign on the glass is hand-painted in gold leaf. The Phoenix Atelier. My phone buzzes on the cutting table. I glance at the screen. It's a notification from my bank app. A deposit has cleared. It's a large sum, a final settlement payment from the insurance fraud investigation. I don't feel the rush of relief I used to feel when I found a crumpled $5 bill in a pocket during my darkest days. I just feel satisfaction. Cold, hard satisfaction. Getting here wasn't magic. It was war. The weeks after the wedding were a blur of depositions, police statements, and forensic accounting. I spent more time in interrogation rooms giving witness statements than I did in my own bed. I had to lay out every humiliating detail of how Leo had duped me, how he had siphoned my accounts, how he had used my identity to secure loans for his high-roller lifestyle. But the evidence I threw at his feet in the church was irrefutable. I remember the day of his sentencing clearly. It was raining, a gray, miserable drizzle that slicked the courthouse steps. I wore a suit I had made myself, sharp tailoring, midnight blue armor for the modern woman. I sat in the back row. When they brought Leo in, he wasn't wearing Italian wool anymore. He was wearing county orange. His hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was grown out and greasy. He looked thinner. He looked like what he always was, a fraud. He scanned the room, looking for anyone to give him a sympathetic glance. His eyes landed on me. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just watched him. The judge gave him 5 years. Wire fraud, identity theft, grand larceny. The list of charges took 10 minutes to read. When the gavel came down, the sound echoed in my chest like a heartbeat. Leo tried to shout something as the bailiffs took him away. I think he called my name. I didn't hear it. I had already stood up and turned my back on him. I walked out of that courtroom and went straight to the leasing office to sign the papers for this space. The bell above the studio door chimes, pulling me out of my memory. I turn around. A woman is standing there shaking a wet umbrella. She looks hesitant, her eyes scanning the racks of clothes before landing on me. It's Sarah. I haven't seen her since the church. She looks different. Her hair is cut short, a sharp bob that frames her face. She looks older, but her eyes are clear. She isn't the deer in the headlights I saw at the altar. Alina, she says, her voice quiet. I put down my fabric shears. Sarah. The air in the studio gets heavy for a second. There is a lot of history between us, most of it painful, none of it our fault. She reaches into her bag and pulls out a thick envelope. She walks over to the counter and places it down. My father wanted you to have this, she says. It's the retainer Leo paid the wedding planner, and the deposit for the venue. Got it all back. I look at the envelope. I don't touch it. You don't have to do that, I say. The courts handled the restitution. I know, Sarah says. She looks down at her hands. The diamond is gone. Her fingers are bare. But we wanted to. He stole from you to pay for a lie he told me. It didn't feel right keeping a cent of it. She looks up at me and for the first time she smiles. It's a sad smile, but it's genuine. I saw the article in Vogue, she adds, about your comeback. Design from the ashes. It was beautiful. Thank you, I say, and I find that I mean it. I'm glad you came to the church, Alina, she whispers. You saved me. I would have married a monster. I didn't do it to save you, I admit, my voice steady. I did it to save myself, but I'm glad you got out. She nods, turns, and walks out the door. The bell chimes again, signaling the end of that chapter. I pick up the envelope. I don't open it. I toss it into the drawer where I keep my sketches. I'll donate it later. I don't need his money anymore. I have my own. I walk back to the dress form. I run my hand over the silk. My accountant told me yesterday that we are projected to triple our revenue by the end of the year. The waitlist for a custom consultation is 4 months long. I have clients flying in from Paris next week. I pick up a pin. I slide it through the fabric, securing the hem. I am 30 years old. I have scars that you can't see. I have trust issues that keep me up at night. I check my bank balance 3 times a day just to make sure it hasn't disappeared. But as I look around this room, filled with light and color and the smell of fresh linen, I realize something. Leo took my money. He took my home. He took my trust. He tried to take my dignity, but he couldn't take my talent. He couldn't take my drive. And he certainly couldn't take my fire. I pick up the shears and cut the final thread. The sound is crisp, sharp, and final. I am not just a survivor. I am the architect of my own life, and the view from here is spectacular.